Hello there, folks. DJBURGSTARRE here, back with another tip of the day. So today I want to talk about my master chain and all the devices that I use in my master, and I'm calling this my ultimate master chain video. I've been using Ableton Live for many years, and about a year ago, I did one of these videos, but since then I've learned some things and I've changed some things up, and I wanted to keep you up to date and show you what my latest master chain is, and I think I've really nailed it. However, take this with a grain of salt. Everybody does their master a bit different, and it also depends on what style of music you're doing. Obviously, if you're writing, orchestral style music, you're not going to have a master chain like this. This is more for EDM and dance and trance and electronic music, and it seems to give me the most sort of loudest, cleanest, most powerful sound I can get right out of the box here in Ableton Live. And let's go over the master chain, and what I'll do is I'll play you a bit of this track with and without my master chain. I have them grouped so I can turn it all on and off at the same time. Also keep in mind over here you'll notice that my master volume is not at 0, and normally it would be, but just for the sake of this YouTube video, I have to turn it down a little bit, or when I'm playing the music, you can't hear my voice very well. So normally, just keep in mind this would be up at 0. But for now, just for the video, it's down here. So that's the only thing I'd like to say about that. So anyway, let's listen to the song, and I'll turn my master chain on and off. That's off, obviously. Alright, so you can see that my master chain does do a heck of a lot. So let's go over the devices and the order they're in and which ones I used to get this sound as loud and as clean as possible. So it matters what order you put these in, because how it works is it starts from the left and it starts adding these things up. So you don't want to have your EQ at the end, before your limiter or something like that. So the order I have these in is important as well. So I start with my EQ, and I use a mid-side EQ here rather than a stereo EQ. And that gives me a little more control over the stereo width of the high end. The yellow line here, that's the stereo, and I can turn up the stereo just a little bit more on these frequencies. And the mid is sort of the center of the music, and I have that mainly flat, except at the bottom here I cut off just a little bit of that low end, the very low end, like 60 hertz or less. I start to taper it off because I don't need that going all the way over. No system really can play anything down at that 20 hertz, so I do roll that off just a little bit on the mid here, or the middle, and in the stereo I roll that off even faster, and that's how I set my EQ. And then moving on, I have a multiband. Now this actually doesn't come with Ableton. This multiband compressor here called Vitamin, it is a Waves Vitamin, and I use it because it has a lot of great controls I like. The bottom volume looking knobs here are actually not volume, they're stereo. So the more you pull this to the left, it's in mono, and the more you pull it to the right, it widens it in stereo. And so my low end here on this frequency, on these low end frequencies, I've turned them down to a little more mono setting, and that's just good practice to have your super low end in more of a mono. And then the center of the sounds that I've turned up just a little bit here, these frequencies, they're right in the center. And then my high end, the very, the hi-hats and the real high-end sounds I turned up the stereo width a little bit on those. So the high-end frequencies are a little bit more in stereo. And this is also a compression too, so it compresses these frequencies a bit and really pulls out the sound. So that's what I use second in my chain. And then I have a regular compressor after that. Now you can use Ableton's compressor, which is just fine to use here. Although since I do own the UAD compressor, I use this one for my master. And I don't have this on a very aggressive setting for my master. In fact, I could even move this a little bit more here to make it a little less aggressive. I just want to have, because I have some other compression going on, I don't want to over compress everything. So this is a 4:1 ratio, and I have these attack and release at a minimum sort of setting here. And the UAD compressor just sounds really nice. This distressor is what they call it, and it sounds really good, so I use that instead of the Ableton compressor, but either one would be okay. And then moving down the line, next I use a multiband compressor from Ableton, and you can use a regular multiband compressor, but I use the one called OTT, and that stands for over the top. And this one is very aggressive. And so you'll notice my amount here is only at 13%. Now, if I'm using a track that's very hard style, I could even crank that up to, 30, 40%. But I leave that down at, somewhere around that 13 to 15% or so in general. And what that is it's a multi-band compressor, so it's compressing the lows and the mids and the highs at different settings that you set this on. Now each one of these could have a separate video on them, so I'm going through these kind of quickly, but I have my mid-range turned up quite a bit. I found over the years that your mid-range is sort of where the cream of your song is. That's, if you can get good mid-range on your song, that's where it's going to sound pro. That's where it's going to sound good. It's really easy to crank up your low end and stuff, but having a good mid-range is really kind of where the money is. So I turn that up a little bit. Even though this is only at 15%, this compressor still does a lot to the sound because it's the OTT compressor, and it does quite a bit. Now moving down the line here, I have a saturator. And if we look at the saturator here in Ableton, let's find it over here. It'll have default settings, and I've chosen this a bit warmer here, and I threw that on my master. And what that's doing is it's adding some saturation to the entire track. Let's listen to it with and without it, see if we can notice the difference. Do you hear that? And what the saturator does is it's adding harmonics and a tiny bit of distortion. Now, the more you crank up the drive, the more kind of distorted it's going to sound, because that's sort of what saturation is it's distortion. But really, I'm using it when it's on this default setting here called a bit warmer. It just adds a little bit of harmonics to the whole track. And what that does is it just fills it out just a little bit. Everything has a little more harmonics and saturation than it normally would without it, of course. And putting that on your master is great. If you just have it, see how the drive here is only at 3.4 dB, so it's not really cranking it up. It's just adding a few extra harmonics, so the whole song is more cohesive and adds a little bit more fullness to the track. I really like having this saturator on my master, and I think a lot of engineers do that. Okay, now moving down the line, I have my glue compressor, and it's sort of standard to have a glue compressor on your master, and the settings you choose here are sort of to your own taste. I use sort of a middle range of settings here, with the ratio at the middle here at 4, and my attack and release are fairly mild, but you got to be careful with the makeup on this, because that's adding a lot of dB to your overall sound. But it depends how much threshold you put on here on how much makeup you need to add. So let's turn the glue compressor on and off and hear the difference. So that really is adding quite a bit. And the glue compressor kind of does what it says. It glues that whole track together with compression, and it's really nice to have on your master. And the next thing, moving over down the line, is my utility. And I use this mainly to put this bass mono on down here. And having your bass, the super low frequencies, you see I have this at 150 hertz, but you could turn that up. Some people have that as much as like 300 hertz. But I like to just have the very low frequencies in mono. And that's just good practice, and that helps your track actually sound better in multiple environments. So sometimes if you play your track, let's say in a big club, you'd be surprised they're actually playing it in mono, not stereo. But also when you're listening to it in stereo, having that super low end bass in mono, it kind of comes from the center. But you don't want to have this up too high, because you might have a really nice Moog bass that has this nice stereo field, and you don't want to mess with the bass. You don't want to lose some of the character of some of your bass. So I just have that way down at 150 hertz. Anything below that's going to be in bass. Mono there. So that's what my utility is really doing for me. I also have this width, if you can look at this here. I have that at 105 instead of 100. So it's just giving just a tad bit more width to my track. Not much. It's almost not even audible, but just a little bit of extra width. by putting that at 105. Some people, crank that up to have a really wide sound for some reason, which you may want to do. But in most cases, you don't want to mess with the width much. You would do that more in your separate tracks here, panning them left and right and stuff rather than doing it on your master. But I have that set just down at like 105, like I said. Seems to be a good setting for me anyway. And then what I have after that, which some people do and some people don't do, is I have a reverb after all of this. And however, if you look over here at the dry wet, it's set at a very low setting. It's just adding a tiny bit of reverb to the whole song, so it all sounds like it came from the same room, from the same place. It's all got the same reverb on it, just a little bit. And of course, you can put the style of reverb you want. I've set this so there's a lot of low end missing. It's just sort of the higher end frequencies, and it's just set a little bit of the dry wet on here just to give it just that little bit of reverb, so it all sounds like the song is coming from the same room, like I said. But it's hardly noticeable because of the dry wet is very low on that. If I wanted a really long tail reverb on, like, a snare drum or something, or a cymbal, I would do that in my separate tracks. But I have just this tiny bit of reverb on my master, which I think just adds that little extra flavor. Okay, moving on to the last device in my chain is a limiter, and I think that should be everybody's last device, unless they have like meters after that so they can see the LUFS or something, but not affecting the sound, just so they can see what's going on. But for me, the last device I have is my limiter, and what I've done here is I have this set to a ceiling of just below 0. So nothing ever goes into the red and peaks out. And my gain is set pretty low here. Right now I have it just sort of generally set at this kind of 150 range, or 1.5 dB. And what I'll do is I'll set my track and get it as good as I can with the mix, and then I'll, at the very end, while I'm mastering the track, what I'll do is I'll turn this gain up slowly and listen. This is more of a listening exercise, and I'll turn that up almost to where I can start to hear a little bit of distortion, or it starts to sound like something's wrong, and then I'll back it up just a little bit from there, so I still have a clean sound, but as loud as it could get without getting distorted. So normally when I do that, this thing will end up somewhere in the 5 or 4 range of dB that I'm adding on my limiter. When I listen, that's sort of where things start to sound a little distorted, and so I'll pull it back, and it'll end up, like I say, usually at around 4 dB. But when I start, I don't want that quite that loud just yet, so it's sort of defaulted here to just 1.5 dB, so I can have a nice clean sound while I'm working. And then when I'm finally doing that last bit of master, this is the last thing I do, so I turn that up as loud as I can, before it gets sounding bad. So anyway, that's my master chain. Or as I like to call it, my ultimate master chain. right. Well, I hope that helped you folks. If you are sort of unclear on how to put your master chain and the devices you need on there, this is great for electronic music. And so thanks for watching again, and I hope to see you guys on the next one. DJ Burgstarre out.